Thanks for listening to Plan to Podcast presented by Mike Masters. What inspired the name of your podcast? And what audience does your podcast cater to?
Episodes, it's myself just speaking and kind of airing out some information. And then some other episodes we have interview based, and that's what you get. But the initial idea and concept behind the Strategy Rewind podcast was, and still is to a degree, I wanted to be able to present a situation and then present the outside perspective of another coach, another leader, another individual, and then bring forth my own application. That is, the podcast would initiate with this conversation, let's say about real estate. I have a friend of mine, Lisa Matthews, who's a real estate agent, and she's been on the podcast before. And so I shared the strategy that I used in order to buy my house. And then on the back end of that, I present Lisa Matthews, and she's able to provide further clarity and information. And another episode, I spoke about grief and how I dealt with it when my mother passed away. And then on the back end, I had a story coach speaker, Jesse Cruz, who spoke about the passing of his daughter, and he presented strategy as well. So on that one episode, you have these two perspectives and these two experiences, but the strategies that's there, it just is massively value. And that's really the concept of it, right? Having so much perspective, so many tools. And then, of course, on the back end is, well, if you want to take it that next step, I'm more than happy to provide the service and or the individual that's been on the podcast episode that you know is an authority figure and someone to be trusted.
What pivotal moments led you to venture into podcasting? And how has this transition impacted your approach to personal development?
My role in podcasting is being able to help many individuals to share their story through podcast. As someone who is an international speaker, as someone who is an author, as someone who communicates, rather that be written or verbal, being able to encourage other individuals who are speakers or aspire to be speakers and want to share their message and then see them do that through the form of podcasting. I think that's been so rewarding. And for me personally, just to be able to help those individuals and organizations to present forth a podcast and be able to share their message. That's been so rewarding for me to see individuals be able to do that. And I think that's a massive necessary tool within the space of personal growth, to be able to share your story and do so in a way that you feel comfortable, because you can either sit behind the mic and turn the camera off, or if you really want to, you can turn the camera on. And so embracing that comfortability, but also embracing the story, has been a massive game changer for many individuals.
Can you discuss the challenges and successes of solo podcasting?
Motivation factor, momentum, the determining factor of what success is. Oftentimes, individuals talk about download numbers. And so the general view seems to be that that's the gauge, right? You want downloads per episodes, and you want listens per minutes, and then many individuals think, well, that's the gauge of success. And as you're a solo podcast host, oftentimes you have to do a lot of the things yourself. I know I've had to. I do the cover art, I do the promotion, I do the editing, the producing, I do all those things for my own podcast. And I've been able to help other individuals, as I previously mentioned, but I've also helped them not just in the aspect of producing and publishing, but also in the coaching. Because this is the thing, when you start a venture like podcasting, you really need to be determined on what is your why and what is the measure of success. Consider the following. If you take a podcast and you publish it on Spotify, on Apple, on Google Podcasts, right? You publish it on those formats, but then you also publish it on YouTube. What is the measure of success? Is it the views on YouTube, or is it the downloads, or is it both? And what's the number, right? Those things need to be determined. Another thing is, maybe none of that is the variable of success. Maybe just understanding that you're reaching people. But then what does that look like? I work with a client of mine that we've worked together for several years now, Vanessa Hobbs, who hosts the podcast The Voice of Tamar. And this year she's actually going to launch her first event. And it is a powerful thing to see the moment that she started podcasting to now, where not just the downloads and the views, we got videos on YouTube where have 60,000 views, and that's amazing. But the real power here for her and what success has been for her is being able to build a community. And that really is a necessary part. So, big challenge is determining what success is for you as a podcaster, and also that momentum, just kind of keep going.
How do you approach community building through your podcast, Strategy Rewind?
If you go to strategyrewind.com, right now you're going to be able to subscribe for free. You can subscribe to the podcast, and of course you can do that too through any of your favorite audio streaming platforms. But if you go through strategyrewind.com specifically and you subscribe, you'll also be subscribed to our newsletter. And one of the beautiful things is that through the newsletter I provide further information, further content on, again, strategies that I'm using myself, rather that would be, for personal growth, for mental growth, and other areas in my life. And it's not always the same conversation that you see or hear, rather, through the podcast Strategy Rewind. So, strategyrewind.com, you can sign up for the newsletter. And what's happened is that we've been able to expand the conversation, because now you get that information straight into your inbox. And it's a beautiful thing when individuals contact me, and we're able to communicate and even meet up. I've met up with many individuals here, at least in the state that I live in. We've been able to link up, and that's a beautiful thing to be able to see that community aspect even beyond the virtual part of things.
What were some of the main points you gathered from your recent time on Bridget Lay's podcast?
It was the first time she had done a Zoom podcast. She had always done something in person. And prior to going live, she was very nervous and very excited, and the inexperience of being able to do it through Zoom. But I've done it so many times. I said, it's gonna be great. Let's do it. She brought energy, I brought energy, she brought content, I brought content, value and vulnerability. And it's always awesome when you can be with a podcaster who is in the space that want to be vulnerable, that because that resonates. I was sharing that podcast with another friend of mine, and they were listening to it, and they were like, well, there's energy here, and it was hooked. So one of the big things there was just her vulnerability within the conversation, because right after she interviewed me, we started talking, and it was off air. We were talking, and I said, you know what, I want to record a podcast with you right now. Let's do it. And so I had her on my podcast. That episode will be airing soon enough. But it was really cool to just see that engagement. Something that was supposed to be 20, 30 minutes ended up being, I think, almost an hour and a half with on and off camera type of stuff. So that was really cool.
What aspects of your message resonate most with your target demographic of blue-collar individuals?
Uh, Practical goals lead to a radical life. And oftentimes there are individuals who want to accomplish something, and they put this big burden on themselves that it has to be now and it has to be this way. And the they make something that's very simple. I'll give you an example. The idea of losing weight for many individuals that may be connected right now, for many of you, it seems daunting to lose weight. How am I going to do that? And then what happens is that when we get to the root of it is the relationship that we have with food. And here's some basic things that you can use. You can start drinking more water and going to bed early. And you're like, that's not going to do anything to my weight, but it does. And then it's like, well, how do you know? Well, because I did it myself, and I wrote about it and spoke about it on my newsletter and on my podcast. I presented the strategy that I've been using of going to the gym, of eating, of the way that I've changed my sleeping habit. And through that, in the year 2023, I was able to lose 20 pounds. And that's a really powerful thing, that we can build these strategies in a practical way, just in a practical way, and then see the radical change that we wish to see. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from what you're going to see on the podcast Strategy Rewind. It's practical, it's personal, and it's professional in the way that it is very clear to decipher and understand.
What is the most underestimated aspect of podcast production that new podcasters should pay attention to?
Be aware of the ums. That, I think, is one of the pitfalls. as someone who has spoken on stages, I've been speaking for, over 20 years now. Again, I'm an international speaker. I help individuals on a one-on-one basis. Like, the communication aspect is so important. So you definitely want to be clear on what your message is, who you want to speak to, but the ums is something that, to me, it really can hurt. And don't get me wrong, like I may have said a or two here in our dialogue, but really you want to be very cautious of this. Like, consider what you're going to say. So that may not seem like it has anything to do with production, but it does, because one of the things that I've seen with my clients whom I help with their podcast is that they will listen back to it. And I've done this exercise. I say, here's what you recorded, and here's after we've edited. And prior to editing, there is 20 ums in a 10-minute time span. That's just too much. You have to be clear of what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and then the energy, because energy matters. If you're watching on video, then you may resonate with the glasses or a certain look or something behind me or around me. You may resonate with something like that. But if you're just engaging with this content and audio, my energy needs to be on 10. Otherwise, it's going to fall flat. And so it may, if you're in the room with me right now, it may sound like I'm almost yelling or screaming, but really it's just high energy so that that translates through. Again, some of these things don't seem to be part of production, but it is, especially when you start editing, because once you start editing, you can't manipulate the audio or the video to show energy. Like, you just can't do that. No matter how good you are, Steven Spielberg can't do it. Like, you have to yourself be clear of what your message is, what you're going to say, be concise with it, so that when you start producing that content, it is as clean and as clear as it can be.
Are there any new themes or directions you are excited to explore in the upcoming episodes of Strategy Rewind?
We've got a ton of content coming out. Every week we have a new podcast that airs, but I'm excited about what's happening with the podcast and the newsletter. I'm working on this new series called Thinking Out Loud, where it's just really, I'm going to be sharing just details that I've been meditating on, like parenting and finances and mental health, and some of these things we've spoken about before, but I'm going to speak about it in a more vulnerable and very much more candid way. And so I'm excited about that and what that's going to look like for the podcast. I did this thing last year where I did an episode a day for the month of February, I believe it was. We did an episode a day. So that was really exciting to just be able to go every single day. And I utilized at that point the platform Wisdom, which is an app where you can ask questions. It's a social media, but really it's more geared towards audio. And so what I was doing was I was going live there, having communication with real people in real time, and then taking that and making it the podcast. So it was really exciting to see the challenge of going everyday live, the not knowing what was going to happen, if people were going to join the room or not, because it is kind of a audio clubhouse feel, and it's very interesting to just see how that played out. And then, of course, the huge benefit that the audience had through that on the podcast on a daily basis, and the amount of people that it reached. So I'm really excited just to build on what we did last year and really just try to be even more vulnerable. I think vulnerability is needed even more so in this time.
What advice do you have for those looking to become personal growth strategists and use podcasting as a platform?
Number one, I would say be clear on what your message is. That's number one. Just be clear on what your message is. And of course, the general message is, well, you have to pick a niche, right? If it's going to be about cars, if it's going to be about, I don't know, horses, you have to pick a niche, is the general consensus. But I like this idea that you are the niche, right? And so you may be someone who likes to talk about paintings and likes to talk about horses and wrestling and NASCAR. Like, that's a wide range. I think as long as you communicate to your audience of, hey, here's what we're going to talk about. I have a friend of mine who's thinking about launching a podcast, and the title is just Holy Random. And, and that's really the idea, that each episode is going to be a unique conversation. So I like this idea of that you are the niche. And if you're clear and vulnerable with the people will listen and gravitate. And it's kind of that whole idea of if you build it, they will come. With reference to those looking to become a personal growth strategist, the number one thing I would say is you have to keep learning. You have to keep learning. I'm of the belief that disciples create disciples, and the word disciple simply means student. And so I have to be a student. I have to constantly be learning. There's a saying that he who teaches learns twice, and really that's the idea, that as a personal growth strategist, I have to be personally growing. I have to be personally challenging myself. I have an individual that I mentor as a speaker, and he was asking me how I felt about my speaking style. And I told him that I felt like my speaking style was going to just switch gears. I really wanted to switch some gears on how I was speaking. And of course, he looked at me and said, "Wait a minute. If you've been speaking for 20 years and you're thinking about switching things up, the way you present yourself, the way you talk, the way you do these things, and you've been speaking for such a long time," he said, "what about me that I haven't been doing it as long as you? I have to go back to the drawing board as well." And that mindset of just being willing to go back to the drawing board, being willing to put in the reps, being willing to work it out. That's something that, as a personal growth strategist, I have to keep doing. Sometimes I get individuals who contact me about spaces that maybe they don't think I know about, but because I've just been searching and I've been researching and I've been reading and I've been watching and I've been really trying to catch a pulse of what's going on around me as far as growth, personal growth, mental growth, emotional growth, spiritual growth, the 10 life domains, I'm able to provide value.
What top 3 podcasting tools are in your toolbox?
Canva is a awesome podcasting tool. It may not seem like it is, but it is, because you can actually upload your video there, and from there you can edit. So if you wanted to create, your shorts, your reels, your TikTok video, you can do that all from Canva. The premium version is always better than the free version, but you can certainly upload those pieces of content, if you will, and go ahead and use it. So I would say Canva. The second one, I would say, I started off with the Blue Yeti microphone. Right now, I'm not using the Blue Yeti. I'm using the Sheer V7. But the Blue Yeti is a very good microphone, inexpensive microphone. And I would say that, you want to get a clean microphone. Now, if you're like, man, I'm not in the budget, and I get it. If you're not in the budget of getting a mic, and that's just not where you're at right now, then I would say the third thing on this list here is this guy, your phone. Whatever kind of phone you have, you want to definitely go ahead and leverage that, because here's the thing: you can easily go ahead and you can use your phone to do a video and to do just audio if you only wanted audio. I mean, just the application that I mentioned, Wisdom. With Wisdom, you can record audioly, and of course, you're going live on Wisdom, but it's just audio. And the beautiful thing is that you can then download that and then upload it to somewhere like, Spotify for podcasters. And so you can do that just by leveraging your phone. As long as you're in a quiet space, that there's no echo or anything like that, the sound quality will be fairly good. And then, you can build from there. So again, Canva, and get yourself a good mic. I would suggest the Blue Yeti, but again, if you don't have that, then number 3, definitely use your phone. Leverage your phone, because your phone has everything you need. I mean, you can download Canva to your phone, you can use the microphone of your phone, and you can use the camera if you wanted to go as well on video.